Well, welcome everyone. It's my real pleasure to have a conversation as part of this series of conversations with the wise, insights and practices for difficult times, with Terry Patten, who's become a good friend in recent years. We're run around in similar circles. We're both on the board of Wellspring Institute, Rick Hanson's foundation. And let me tell you a little bit about Terry so you know who he is. He is the author of a book that's just come out, which I highly recommend, called A New Republic of the Heart, an Ethos for Revolutionaries. Hot off the press, and it's something that I wanted everybody to know about, and we'll get into the content in our conversation. A few other things. He's also with Ken Wilber wrote a book called Integral Life Practice. He's a social entrepreneur and activist, very much focusing on restorative redwood forestry and fossil fuel alternatives, and is the founder and director of Bay Area Integral. And besides that, he's somebody who's become a friend and who I respect as really as much as anyone I know, for just a depth of thinking and at the same time bringing a real heart to his view in the world. So it's a real pleasure to have you here with us, Terry.
Thank you so much, James. It's always a delight to be with you, and I'm delighted to meet your community too.
Great. So we've been having these conversations about not just getting through these crazy times, but waking up in the midst of them and hopefully making a difference in the process. And I have been really enjoying hanging out with your book, this A New Republic of the Heart. It's always good when a friend gives you a book to read and you really like it. Then I can, there's no holding back and saying you should read this, because it so comprehensively covers both the psychological state that we're in and the real facts of where we are as a species at this moment in time in our planet, without sugarcoating things, and seeing the crisis that we're in. As you know, as the Chinese characters say, crisis is made up of danger plus opportunity, and the inspiring and potentially optimistic vision that you have, that makes complete sense to me through it. So I want to explore some of that with you.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm looking forward to doing that.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that our whole culture, our whole society is in such deep denial as to our total situation is it's something that, spiritual practitioners have for ages woken up from different kinds of trances and dreams, and that's been the whole nature. But I think we're in a moment in which, there's this new phrase of getting woke, like getting woke to racism or getting woke to the environmental crisis. And we're at a time when it's not enough to be awakened, we also have to be woke. And for the community of the woke to get awakened as well.
And how would you define woke as opposed to awaken?
Well, I think it's used in parlance, as a kind of political consciousness raising. You're woke to the systemic problems that need to be addressed in our world. And I think that this is, the recognition that our inner work has to express itself in a more dynamic, more effective, more consequential outer work, that it needs, that, we have problems that can't be solved with the kind of consciousness that created them. And those of us who've endeavored to change our consciousness kind of signed an IOU. Okay, well, you've got that consciousness, now use it to solve those problems.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When I hear the word woke, like you say, there's a dynamic aspect, like it's almost a rude awakening, as the as the other term, although that's not quite as inviting, but we are being shaken to out of our complacency to meet this moment in a profound way.
I mean, most of the practitioners I encounter are, they're members of a wealthy society, Western democracy, whether it's Europe or America, North America, or even people from all over the world. Most of us have access to a lot of comfort and ease and safety compared to the poorest people in the world.
Mm.
And that, with that privilege comes a tendency to feel a little bit insulated from the extremes of life and death. And yet, at the level of our, most of us have used our privilege to educate ourselves and to try to understand what's happening. And to the degree we really take a look at it, we're discovering, well, just this past fall, 15,000 scientists signed a new version of the 1992 Warning to Humanity that had been penned by the majority of the then living science Nobel laureates. And we're also seeing that the actual readings for temperature and extreme weather events and ocean acidification are exceeding what were formerly imagined as the worst case predictions. The forecasts are hair raising, and the implications for our descendants and the future of life on the planet are hair raising. I don't think that climate science is exact, and there may be graceful, good news in the midst of it. But if we extrapolate what's best known, but the serious climate scientists have been hitting the panic button now for years and years and years, and yet the bulk of society continues to fundamentally function in denial. And we're social creatures. So no matter how much we practice, to some degree, we take on that kind of complacency and denial, especially because our lives are so comfortable, and we're making decisions about what movies to see and what trips to take, and the level of seriousness that we're actually facing, it doesn't easily register for people.
So how to move beyond that complacency? I know you write about it, and that's one of the reasons I'm putting on these conversations and sharing the little that I feel and know to make a difference. But how do you think people will woke up or be woke, awake to it? And how do you see this thing?
For me, it is a consequence of my practice. That the first phase, like the Zen ox herding pictures, they describe a process of clarifying the mind and clarifying the heart enough so that we emerge from our identification with our separate circumstance and the arising conditions into a kind of freedom from conditions. But ultimately it becomes freedom to engage. And, we return to the marketplace with open hands, having stalked and found and ridden and tamed, the ox of the mind, we find ourselves, uh, you know, mountains are mountains and rivers are rivers again, and we're back in the fray. And I think that uh, the fact that we're living in a time in which, what could have more moral force than the fact that our very way of life, middle class Americans or Europeans or Australians or Japanese, whoever, wherever we are around the world, our lifestyles are the very thing that is uh, creating the imbalances that are potentially in the process of destroying human-friendly conditions on the planet. Mm-hmm. and the consequences to our descendants, to our grandkids or great grandkids, but even really the extreme weather events that are already upon us, the fires and floods and hurricanes and so forth, and droughts and killer heat waves. How can we relate to that as our teacher? Because these things really are our teacher, and there's a certain kind of error that we make by ignoring it and living in a sense, an inauthentic life because we're in denial of these things. And then there's another kind of error, which is it's very hard to be with these things and not be just disheartened and even maybe alarmed and hitting the panic button and paralyzed or paranoid. The work of being true in the midst of this is to get mobilized and to join with each other. A big thing, as you know, from having spent some time with my book, is that it's as if we've been given a koan together, a koan that you can't answer and I can't answer. We need each other to answer. It's a collective inquiry that we've been thrust into. We've been given all this privilege and education and access to information and wisdom, all the wisdom traditions in the world. And we've been given this ridiculous dilemma that seems, how could we affect? And yet there's a moral necessity to try to affect it. And we can only really address that as fellow practitioners and as fellow practitioner activists. But what is activism? We can't define it too narrowly. It's not just about marching or petitioning or donating or volunteering. It's got to be about our whole way of being human, has to begin to be consequential in terms of our collective behaviors. And I think that the many things that we can do are important to do, but staying in the question, like you stay in a koan, is also really important.
So two things that are coming to mind. Love to hear your thoughts on. One is for the privileged, who, as you say, can insulate themselves in complacency or saying, "Oh well, it's too big for me to even think about," or "What can I do?" How to engage them beyond despair or helplessness or denial. How to engage them to say, okay, I want to and need to be a part of this. And then for those who are not privileged, to whom the events, say, of climate, but not just climate, whether it's racial injustice or economic injustice or all the other ways that those that are not privileged bear the brunt, how to engage them so that it's rather than saying, "Oh, we uh, we have to just take care of ourselves over here rather than we're all in this together and have an inclusive engagement, because that it seems like that's going to be what's called for.
Yes. We're in a lifeboat together that is so large that we forget that it's a lifeboat. But if we get woke to our real situation, there's a kind of ferocity and urgency that comes forward, I think, that, it's a little bit like a complete, not merely nonviolent, but even non-oppositional moment in which something revolutionary is necessary, and in which, in a sense, there's an analogy to when the revolutionary cadre declares the new revolutionary state and declares war on the old government. There's a kind of, I will not let you presume separation from me. We're in this together. I'm not abandoning you, and I'm not accepting your denunciation or ridicule of me. I am standing with you, and I think the impact of a real deep contemplation of our situation is, wow, we just have to be the change in a way that means, even for those of us who've devoted our lives to serious practice and good works, we have to change too. The change that's implicit here lies before us if we're all sitting with this pressure and allowing it to evolve us. It's a stage transition. It's a maturation of the whole human species that is going to be necessary, because the change ahead is vast. As great as Dr. King or Gandhi were, these changes of the civil rights movement or the ending of British colonialism in India, you can get your hands around those changes a lot more easily than the conversion of the whole human species from an extractive, growth-addicted, consumption-focused economy to one that's permanently sustainable, and that's an even more radical transition, and so we kind of have to each become capable of having that kind of noble strength and stand that those great exemplars like Dr. King and Gandhi, were. Not that we have to, no delusions of grandeur that we're equal to these great figures, but together as a sangha, the next Buddha may be a sangha. We kind of at least have to aspire to be humble and committed and noble, and cultivating that within ourselves that can be that profound in our practice and consequential in our practice. And as we know, anybody who's tried to build a community of any kind, whether it's a communal household or a sangha, all the Zen centers or, meditation groups, people are hard. Community is tough. It's one of the hardest things that anybody does. I always laugh at I think some spiritual comedian offered the line, I love humanity, but people, oi. and what it is for us to be able to break through those patterns and be cooperatively a stand for something better, where there's genuine nobility of spirit and altruism and kindness and generativity and creativity, and the humility not to just keep proffering the wisdom we already have and the answers we already have, but to stay in the cauldron of these profound transformational need. We need a whole system change. We can't deal with this in any way less than that. And maybe it will be a great hospice project. Maybe we can't turn it all around. We don't know what the future will be, but it will certainly matter, even under the worst case conditions, that large numbers of us find a way to be in the presence of love in action together,
Mm-hmm.
and to find joy and meaning under whatever circumstances, we face.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I'm sorry. Right?
Go ahead.
I, I, uh, I sometimes respond when people say, "Oh well, around climate disruption, oh, it's probably too late," or what's the point? And I feel along these lines that humanity will wake up sooner or later. It's just slowly, or maybe even in the grand scheme of things, not so slowly, waking up. And who knows if it's going to be in time to prevent tremendous suffering. But if we're going to wake up sooner or later, which I believe we will, might as well do what we can to make it on the sooner side, because the sooner, the less suffering. So whatever we do to uh, help create that awakening will have its effects of at least less suffering. But and I'm curious. One of the things in the book that that shined through, that I was so uh, um, happy to see, was this sense of possibility. And so I want to ask you to share a little bit about, there is some optimistic strain through what you write and what you speak. Talk a little bit about that. What do you see as the possibilities, and you really believe that will happen? And just how do you hold your most positive vision of what we're heading towards?
Well, first of all, the future is emergent, and until it happens, it has not happened, and the future is being co-created by what we're doing and how we're being in every moment. And every one of us and our behaviors, they ripple out when we practice, when we find a way to meet the challenges of our lives with grace and generosity and courage and kindness. The world is affected by that. So we have to recognize that even when we see a celebrated scientist say we only have 5 years left, or we only have 10 years left,
Mm-hmm.
they don't really know that absolutely, that none of these things are quantified. And there's tremendous vitality in life itself. The whole story of evolution has been a story of miracle after miracle, really. The evolutionary emergence and the great moments of enormous emergence have been like the emergence of life out of dead matter, or the emergence of consciousness out of seemingly vegetative life.
Mm-hmm.
Those are miracles.
Mm-hmm.
There's nothing about what had been going on previously that predicts them. And there are lots of forms of emergence that are smaller. So emergence can take place right now in us. And we know how radical, profound enlightenment, spiritual awakening can be, and how different we can become. So the potential for dramatic change, can't be underestimated. Also, scientific progress is becoming so dramatic, and it builds exponentially. Principles like Moore's law, this doubling every so many months of
What is Moore's law?
It's got to do with the speed with which we innovate greater and greater computer speed.
Mm.
And what it recalls is that great parable of the wise man and the emperor. The empire had been saved by the advice of this wise man, and how can I repay you? Well, if you give me some rice, maybe 1 grain of rice on the first square of the checkerboard, and 2 on the second, and 4 on the third, and 8 on the fourth. Of course, by the end of the checkerboard, more rice than had ever existed in that kingdom and any other would be required. And that's the nature of exponential growth. It's, that kind of constant doubling. The second before the swimming pool is full, it's half empty. 2 seconds before, it's quarter empty, quarter full rather. The dramatic nature of scientific progress, it is not impossible. It is hard to imagine, and we can't count on it. But the potentials for something like a free, clean energy source are not absolutely impossible. The potentials for radical breakthroughs in our understanding of physics that might allow us to reverse some of the damage we've done to our air and water, is not inconceivable. So there's room for that. I think that our public society tends to assume that technology is going to fix everything. And
it's tricky to bet on a miracle.
That attitude excuses a kind of complacency, and I don't want to encourage that. But I think the fact that we have profound disruptive negative events in our future, these awful extreme weather events, that if the climate science is accurate, will produce horrific events, billions of people displaced from their homes, and enormous political and social disruption. Look, the comparatively little bit of mass migration we've already seen has totally disrupted the politics of the world. And if orders of magnitude more is in the pipes, the images that it summons are horrific. But the radical nature of suddenly being freed of any constraints on available energy by a free, cheap energy source, if that were to come into being, we just don't know, which means we don't know enough to be pessimistic. And this is I have such profound respect for the deep ecologists who have had psychological and spiritual fortitude to face the grim implications of not just climate science, but the sixth extinction, the devastation of the oceans, these enormous. We're all social creatures, and so we are members of a society that's in denial, and that means we can't help but, to some degree, be in denial. And people who break from that and who see that it's very likely from a certain logic that all our descendants are going to have to live through hell and probably won't, and that maybe most of the posterity into which our best good works would flow will not be able to hold them, because the circumstances that give people enough free attention and leisure to be even practitioners, may no longer pertain. Those are hellish prospects. And the people who've had the integrity and discernment and courage, to face this and let it shift them, I really respect them, but they very, very rarely can hold all of that and hold the fact that we don't know it's going to happen. It seems probable from a certain logic, and that logic may prove to pertain, and that may be our future, but it may not. And what it is to live on this knife edge in which many people are predicting a future where there will not be work anymore. We'll need a universal basic income because nobody will have to work because machines will take care of everything. You see predictions of such great prosperity and such great disaster right next to each other. And what it is to live with intentionality and grounded seriousness in the midst of that kind of uncertainty. I think it's asking us to grow to a whole new level. I mean, it needs to be rooted in the ancient Dharma, and the ancient Dharma doesn't change in a way. but it does change in a way. It doesn't invalidate or change the nature of Dharma or practice.
Sorry about that. Got the phone.
Yeah. Okay. But it definitely changes the context, and it asks us to be profoundly present in the moment and alive to the miracle. You know, everybody in the old days lived right next to death. And for a couple of generations, we've managed to push death away and to really expand the leisure and the spaciousness in which we've been able to live. And I think you've made wonderful choices, James. You've devoted all of that freedom to cultivating wisdom and compassion and joy. And I've done my best to do something kind of similar. Mm-hmm. But there was something easy. It is in this same age that our rates of anxiety and depression and addiction and suicide have skyrocketed, right? It's very hard to the luxury that enables us to have lives devoted to the Dharma also creates a lot of psychosocial, emotional challenges for us. Mm-hmm. And in a way, we're having to wake up to the fact, it takes my forebrain to cognize all of this. It is complex. It takes understanding something about climate science and time and space. It's a sophisticated, but really we're right up against life and death again, just like we always were. Mm-hmm. Always throughout human history, there have been hard times and beautiful times right next to each other. We've had our hearts broken, and yet the dawn has risen and been beautiful again and again. Mm-hmm. And that's what's ahead for us anyway. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So there's a kind of hope in the recognition that whatever, my soul chose somehow, assented to be born into this time in which all of these trends are converging so intensely. This is where the action is. This is the all hands on deck moment. Mm-hmm. Gene Houston likes to say, all through history, everybody's always thought that they lived in the moment that was really most important, but they were wrong. This is it.
Well, or it's always now.
Or it's always now. All of that being true. But the degree to which this is where the action is at from like in our lifetimes, mm-hmm. the future of the biodiversity on this planet and the potentials for Dharma to even survive another several hundred years, hinge on things that happen in the next few years, really. There's so much at stake. That's not just a burden, it's a privilege. It's like if we allow it to be a Shaktipat, be an initiatory, energizing shock to the system that wakes us up. Mm-hmm. It's enlivening. It's miraculous.
Mm-hmm. So if I understand you, your optimism or seeing the possibility is in part due to letting go of knowing how it's going to be and seeing all possibilities, being open to all possibilities, but not excluding a genuine awakening, a reboot of the system, so to speak, as one of the very real possibilities in there.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that small numbers of people can have enormous effects. There's a 10% principle that when a new understanding that has substance arises in 10% of the population of a country or a region, it spreads like wildfire once that happens. And achieving something like 10% can create a revolution of understanding. And I think that new structures and, higher consciousness, is one of the things that it's what I'm devoting my effort to primarily.
Mm-hmm.
But that higher consciousness cannot exclusively focus itself only on the inner work. It has to, by our fruits they shall know us, and so our commitment to changing the actual conditions of life on this planet for human and non-human beings.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that we're in a tipping point. You see, the future will not be like the past,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and that's unknowable. And so we're being. I feel like I want to share the. I went through some really dark nights of the soul in the process of researching this book, when I really saw how strong the trends are that lead toward a very, very dystopian future.
Mm-hmm.
But I ended up recognizing that this is granting me the potential of a life of so much more profundity and purpose, and a kind of aliveness and significance. And I've come to recognize, I often say, things are far too serious for us to lose our sense of humor.
Mm-hmm.
And that it asks of me, things are so serious in a sense that to become distraught and depressed and anxious is morally indefensible.
Mm-hmm. So let me ask you, that makes sense conceptually. In a practical way, when you find yourself in despair or fear about the possibilities, and you know that you need to switch the channel, how do you internally switch that channel? Any particular practices that you use that might be helpful for others to cultivate as well?
Well, I find my way to recognizing that I have, we don't have control over the outcomes, but we have control over how we participate, and that then it becomes important that my participation express what's best in me, and that I recognize that if I'm caught up in my fear or my anxiety or my dread, I'm choosing to be dread, and in a way I'm creating what I wish to avoid. And that sense of the we're empowered. We are empowered to create the future by our very way of showing up in it. And so for me, the recognition of that really does inspire me. It inspires a kind of, oh, okay, yes, this is my cue to show up as a practitioner, to really be what I know to be most authentic and deep and true. And it also relieves me of there's a kind of, I've spent a certain amount of time in luxury places, in fancy resorts or gated communities or restaurants, that are ultra luxurious. And I often see a great deal of unhappiness among the very rich. I don't see that it's a place of maximum joy.
Mm-hmm.
There is a kind of, when the heart is sated, there's a yearning for relief, for release into what's really alive, and you know. So I think the, like, if it is given to us, you know, you've read Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, from death camp to existentialism, and there were people in the death camps who just went around comforting people and sharing what little food they had, their crusts of bread, and being a presence of love. And if we can make a no matter what commitment to embody our values, it ennobles us. And if I'm reminded that I have that choice in each moment, mm-hmm. it wakes me up out of this abstracted sense. You know, we're not in the stands watching all of this happen. Mm-hmm. We're on the field. We have the ball. We are the story. Mm-hmm. And that, it's just like, wow, you know, looked at from certain perspectives, this terrifies me. It just scares the bejesus out of me. It horrifies me. It breaks my heart. It's devastating. Mm-hmm. And yet it all zeroes down to, oh, I would rather be love. I would rather, I can be love. In fact, let's wake up out of this abstracted observer frame and show up. Mm-hmm. And here's a chance for me to be right here, right now, as the radiance of feeling and awareness, you know, awake to the divine mystery of being, and a presence of care and kindness and industry. And, you know, sometimes it's hard work, sometimes it's a willingness to tolerate discomfort or pain.
That's an inspiring way of holding things. And in my better moments, I'm there seeing that bigger picture, saying, "Oh, I'm part of something bigger, and I'm here to do my part, and help bring that out in as many people as I can, and help get them in touch with their love of life." And I still find it a challenge to both hold my own fears and overwhelm, and that leads to inertia. Although this is an ongoing exploration for me, especially being in the teacher seat compels me to take a look at that. But and it's something that I want to somehow communicate that would be useful for others. But to move from overwhelm and inertia to engagement, and you have a chapter in there about this, getting into action. Practices, how I ways that I can kind of wake up to engagement, because I know once I do get engaged, I feel so much better. So that I'm just interested if you have something further to move from those very profound thoughts and ways of holding this.
Well, quite honestly, James, I'm just a fellow practitioner, you know, as every teacher ultimately is, and I'm appreciating your genuineness and your being in the question. I think it's really important for us to stay in the questions together. I do have partial answers, and I have contemplated this long and hard. That's why the book has is such a rich integration of so much.
Mm-hmm.
But I hesitate to respond to the question with an answer, because I'm actually it's so much more fruitful for us to drop deep and stay in these questions, because these are such profound questions, and we're all in them together, that they disarm us. They break open ground. It's like, I mean, I've met your beautiful son, and probably grandkids are going to be on the way before too awfully long, I hope.
Oh, I have 3 by my other son. My oldest.
That's right. You do.
Definitely.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Yeah.
we care so much for the new life, and that in a way our generations have been on the watch during the years in which their prospects have been damaged by collective human behavior, and it's heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
And in a way, we're all kind of horrified, like, gosh, we've only tried to make our lives all about a kind of goodness, and have we somehow inadvertently been party, to a great, crime against humanity,
Mm-hmm.
and non-human life. To be broken open in that, and to not be defending ourselves, it's like we're living in the tensions of an impossible question that's maybe going to give birth to an even deeper level of friendship and humanity and human maturity.
Mm-hmm. And I will say, just on the other side, that there's something happening in recent times, even with these completely off the charts, insane times that we seem to be living with, every day, or every few hours in the news cycle. There's another oh my God moment, but there's also excitement and enthusiasm, and a kind of galvanizing of shared intention in response to those.
That's right.
And things are traveling at such a fast speed, as you mentioned before, that the coming together um, of people's commitment is quite astounding, especially in these weeks, since the young people are seem to be taking the lead, and they've got the energy and the passion and the commitment and the don't get in our way attitude. If you're not with us, that gives me a lot of encouragement.
Absolutely, so inspiring. And interestingly, I care very much about the gun issue. I think it's super important, and I'm just cheering them full-throatedly. But it's also a generational issue. The climate and environment are a generational issue, and once they're motivated to recognize their social leadership potentials, our crimes against the young, at the level of both environmental and fiscal irresponsibility, are also going to become political issues, and I think that we will have an opportunity and a responsibility to bring to bear our support. We've lived pretty full lives, and for us to be a little bit more heroic and to take some risk, either with our time and money, or even putting our bodies on the line, taking the kind of risk that it might take to do voter registration in a red state where a lot of people disagree with you and have guns. I think some of us older people can be joining with that youthful energy in a whole new way too. And I'm excited to do that myself. I feel like the 2018 election cycle ought to be an opportunity for a rich engagement and volunteer engagement by an awful lot of serious practitioners of Dharma.
Yeah, well, and Jane and I have been feeling the same way, and we're actively getting involved, putting on a fundraiser for voter registration in a swing area and things like that, and just hoping that besides alleviating my anxiety, that can make a difference and help others to roll up their sleeves and say, okay, this is the time to get involved.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
absolutely.
Yeah,
and I think that this is just all the reasons that we entered into the Dharma stream in the first place are just heightened by all of this. So perhaps they wake us up, because the path begins with every new breath, and these pressures are just intensifying the fact, waking up out of all we know about it. The mystery is original and fresh, and not my ideas about the mystery. It's the amazing, awesome reality of it blows your mind every time you wake out of your woos of knowledge into the divine ignorance that recognizes it.
mm-hmm.
The heart opens with awe,
And that seems to be. I know we share this. For me, one of the main ways that I go through or underneath or bigger than the craziness of whatever is happening at any moment in time, to just tune into the mystery of not only who knows, but how is it that I'm here, even knowing itself, that life is somehow knowing itself through me, that brings a kind of freshness and awe and joyful responsibility, as Julia Butterfly Hill says, to want to participate.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Well, any last thoughts that you have and to share?
I just want to thank you for the embodied, emotionally deep and connected way you show up in conversation, James. And I'm honored that you've been taking my book to heart so much, and I just want to thank you.
Mm-hmm. Really have. Well, I want to thank you. I will happily just share it one more time. A New Republic of the Heart, an Ethos for Revolutionaries. Terry Patten, you've done a beautiful job, and hope that your thinking and perspective touch and reach a lot of people. Thanks for making a difference in this world.
Thanks so much, James.
Okay, my friend.
All right.
Thanks to everybody listening, and may you all go out and make a difference in whatever way nourishes you and gives you a sense of contribution. We need your caring and your love. So thanks to all.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye.